Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Are you looking for the fastest gaming CPU in the world? Do you want the fastest frame rates, the quickest input response, and the ultimate gaming experience? You've come to the right place. Today, Intel launches the i9-9900KS, the 8-core 16-thread 5 GHz all-core turbo beast of a CPU for the low price of only $513. Before we get to that, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with more than 25,000 classes in design, business, and more. For less than $10 a month, you get unlimited access to every class on Skillshare. That is an unbeatable value. Whether you want to fuel your creativity, curiosity, or career, Skillshare is the perfect place to keep you learning. An example of a class you might start with is YouTube vlogging, how to start a YouTube channel today. If you want to do what I do, you can use this class to give you an idea of where to go. This particular teacher has almost 1,500 students and 71 reviews that you can read on the Skillshare site. Because Skillshare is sponsoring this video, you can sign up with the link in the video description below and you get 2 free months of unlimited access to every class on the site. That's a deal. Okay, now back to the video. If you were considering the i9-9900K non-special edition chip, but you have not yet made your purchase, you might as well go ahead and get the special edition. Intel is only charging $25 more than the regular K chip, and you get 5 GHz guaranteed clock speed out of the box. That is a 300 MHz boost to the all-core turbo of 4.7, and no overclocking or multi-core enhancement is required. Representing the red team in today's video is the AMD Ryzen 9 3900X. This is a 12-core, 24-thread, multi-threaded beast. It is about the same price as the 9900KS. It has more cores and threads, but runs at a little bit slower clock speed. So the question is, more cores or faster cores? We have lots of benchmarks to show you today. Some of you may be asking, where's the Ryzen 7 3700X? Great question, glad you asked. The 3700X is 8-core 16 threads just like the i9 for less money. It's not going to have the multi-threaded performance. It's not here because AMD just released a new Aegis update for their BIOS going to 1.0.0.4, and I didn't have time to test it to get the latest performance numbers. We're using 1.0.0.3 ABBA. Yes, those are terrible numbers. Blame AMD, not me, for the Ryzen 9 testing. I will do a follow-up video to this on the latest AMD Ryzen BIOS to do a battle of the 8-core CPUs reloaded between the i9-9900KS and the 3700X, where the cores and threads will be the same, but the price will not. Which CPU should you buy? That depends. Are you gaming or non-gaming or a mixture of both? We'll take a look at both of those in today's benchmarks. How much do you care about the fact that the Intel chip does have Intel's integrated graphics with QuickSync support, which AMD does not? And it also depends on whether you're doing an all-new build or do you have an existing compatible motherboard that you're going to upgrade to. If you have an existing AM4 motherboard, it is really hard to compete with the value of doing a BIOS update and installing a Ryzen 9 3900X. If you have a Ryzen 3 1200, Ryzen 5 1600, or even a Ryzen 7 1700, 10 minutes to update your BIOS, 10 minutes to install the CPU, and you can easily get double, if not triple the performance without having to reinstall Windows or rebuild your computer. That's a deal. Intel gets a lot of flack from the enthusiast community for the fact that they don't maintain the same socket for as many years as AMD does. However, that does not make a CPU upgrade impossible. If you have a 2-year-old B360 or H370 motherboard, you can still upgrade. If you have an i5-8400, which is a 6-core, 6-thread processor that runs at 3.8 GHz, you can absolutely update your BIOS and install this 8-core, 16-thread, 5 GHz CPU. You'll need a new cooler, but you'd have to buy a new cooler for it anyway. And you will get roughly double the performance to your old i5-8400. No motherboard replacement required, no Windows reinstall. If you do have such a machine, that's a fairly reasonable upgrade. Speaking of Intel CPU swaps, let me show you two real-world examples of who can do this. 2 years ago, I reviewed this computer. It is the $750 i5-8400 CyberPower PC that I covered extensively on my channel at the time. Good value for the money at the time, but it does have a 6-core, 6-thread processor running at 3.8 gigahertz. It also incidentally came with a Z390 motherboard, simply because the B360s weren't out yet, which makes it the ideal candidate for upgrading to a CPU such as this. If you bought this 2 years ago when I recommended it, but you're now finding that the CPU is a little bit thin, it does have a 500 watt power supply. It will absolutely handle an i9-9900KS 5 gigahertz chip, and that will be a huge performance boost. A year and a half ago on the channel, I did a custom build, which is this computer right here. This was the $800 i3-8350K 4.8 gigahertz 4-core, 4-thread machine. It's got a liquid cooler, it's got a Z-series board, it's very nice. It was designed for esports and MMO games, Star Wars The Old Republic and that sort of thing. And 2 years ago, that wasn't such a bad option with what was available at the time. However, going into 2020, that really doesn't cut it anymore for a premium experience. Again, the perfect candidate for an i9-9900K, already liquid cooled, already Z board. Drop it in, and in 20 minutes, you're going to be gaming with the fastest gaming CPU in the world. So yes, AMD is known for having great upgradability, and in fairness, they do, absolutely. But it's not exclusive to them, and these are two really good real-world examples from my channel that demonstrate how you can upgrade to a faster CPU, even on Intel. Circling back around to my previous comment of it depends upon what you're doing, if you are primarily a gamer, if fast, fluid, and smooth gaming with the maximum frame rates and the most future gaming performance is what matters to you, let's not mince words here. The Intel CPU is a faster gaming CPU than the Ryzen, even Zen 2. Now, the Ryzen CPU is not bad. It's close. But how close depends upon which games you're playing, which resolutions you're playing, whether you have a 60 Hz or 144 Hz monitor. We're going to show you some benchmarks in just a second. But if gaming is your thing, this is the king. If, on the other hand, you're not mainly a gamer, but you're also interested in powerful multi-threaded performance in Windows for non-gaming tasks, 3D animation, video encoding, running virtual machines, or anything else that eats cores for breakfast, allow me to introduce you to the fastest $500 CPU you can buy. The Ryzen 9 3900X is not as fast as Intel in gaming, but it demolishes Intel when it comes to multi-threaded performance, as you'll see in our non-gaming benchmarks in just a minute. Having just made those two qualifications on these CPUs, let me throw a wrench into the works. Twitch or Mixer live streaming. It is true that Intel is a faster gaming CPU and that AMD is a faster multi-threaded CPU. If you want to live stream the latest and greatest games, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the next Battlefield game, if you want to live stream games that are going to use or already using 8 cores for the game itself, yes, there's GPU encoding, and I'm already taking that into account. You should be using your graphics card to encode for Twitch or Mixer, but OBS and your web browser with your dashboard, tools in your task tray, background applications, those all use something, maybe a voice comm program to chat with your friends that you're playing with online. If you are live streaming, 8 cores may not actually have the longest future due to the fact that there's nothing left over once the game is running. If you're only looking to play at 60 frames per second, the Ryzen 9 3900X has the benefit of 8 cores for your game and 4 more cores to run all the other tasks required to stream, still with GPU encoding. And if you're looking for a Twitch streaming CPU, you might find the Ryzen 9 is actually a better balanced option for you. The truth of the matter is, both of these CPUs are incredibly fast and powerful. It's like picking between a Ferrari and a Lamborghini. It's a lot of personal taste and style besides just raw performance. If you're upgrading from a 5-year-old CPU, either of these are going to be mind-blowingly fast compared to what you currently have. Your choice might very well come down to which team you prefer. One final point to consider between these two CPUs: AMD has no integrated graphics whatsoever. The i9-9900KS has Intel's integrated HD graphics. Useless for gaming, let's be real here, but it does have the benefit of providing Intel's QuickSync for video transcoding, video playback acceleration. If you use Adobe Premiere Pro, it's accelerated on the iGPU, which it's not on dedicated GPUs from AMD and NVIDIA. It also has the benefit that in live streaming, if you don't want to use your dedicated video card to leave it 100% available for your game, you can use QuickSync to live stream as opposed to the NVIDIA encoder or AMD encoder. It's not a huge feature, but it's nice to have, and for some of you, that'll be important. Now it's time for some benchmarks. First the games, then we'll take a look at the productivity benchmarks. All of the CPUs were run at stock speeds. Multi-core enhancement was not turned on the K chip because frankly that turns it into the KS, making this kind of pointless. And if you do have a K chip, turn that on with a decent cooler and you effectively have one of these. 5 gigahertz with no overclocking on the KS chip. It would not run at 5.2 stable in everything on my Noctua NHD15. And then we did run at stock but with Power Boost Overdrive turned on the Ryzen 9 3900X. The Intel CPUs were tested on my Intel test bench with a Z390 ASRock Taichi motherboard, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 4000 CL19 RAM, and the Noctua NHD15 cooler. The AMD was run on my AMD test bench, which is an X570 MSI Meg Ace motherboard. It's a very nice board. 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3600 CL16 RAM. My 4000 will not run on the X570, which is why I didn't put it there, but comparably with CL ratings, those are really, really close. And we had a Noctua NH-U12A, which is a brand new cooler from Noctua, very nice dual fans, on the AMD test bench. All of the products talked about and shown in today's video will be linked down in the video description below to Amazon and Newegg. If you found my very long video helpful, informative, useful, interesting, or entertaining, please consider using those links while shopping. They are affiliate links. They support the channel at no extra cost to you, and using them while you shop, whether you buy this CPU or something else, definitely helps us out, and it's greatly appreciated. Now on with the benchmarks. Our first benchmark today is Far Cry New Dawn at 1080p high detail. I do have 1440p and 4K numbers for you. I'll show you those in a minute. But I'm using 1080p because the purpose here is to test CPU performance, not GPU performance. RTX 2080 Ti, take a look at the MSI Afterburner numbers in real time at the top of the screen. Notice that the graphics card is not 100% utilized on either test. We are actually CPU bound in both of these benchmarks because frankly the graphics card just can't get data fast enough. Even though the CPU percentage is really low, keep in mind this game does not use lots of cores and threads. Notice the Ryzen 9 3900X has a lower percentage utilization. That's because it has 12 cores, 24 threads. So 4 cores or 6 cores usage on that is going to be a lower percentage than 4 or 6 cores on the i9 because it has 8 cores, 16 threads. So the usage is certainly going to be a bit higher. Performance-wise, well, the winner there was kind of obvious if you were watching it. You may want to scroll back and watch it one more time. 146 frames per second on the KS, 140 on the K. That's the difference right there between 300 megahertz going from 4.7 to 5.0 is 6 frames per second. And at that frame rate, frankly, that's pretty minor. The Ryzen 9 3900X does a very respectable 122 frames per second. You may be looking at this going, I have a 60 hertz monitor. What are you talking about? Well, if you do, then this is all extreme, ridiculous, way overkill. You don't need any of these frame rates if you have a 60 hertz monitor. But if you have a 1080p 144 hertz monitor and you want all your games to run at 144 frames per second, well, you have your answer. Notice I'm using 1% and 0.1% low numbers here. I'm not using the minimums and maximums of built-in benchmarks anymore. I ran these tests independently. I'm going to be doing that from now on going forward. And yes, the 1% and 0.1% low numbers are better, of course, on Intel as well. Here are the 1440p numbers. Notice that they're a little bit more compressed. Yes, there are still differences. We go from 133 to 139 on the two Intel chips. That's basically 4.7 to 5 gigahertz. And then the Ryzen 9 slows down to 119. Still very respectable, great performance. If you look at that number and go, shoot, I'd love to have 119 frames per second. Well, there you go. It does a good job. It just isn't quite as fast. The 1% low numbers, very, very nice. Frankly, it runs this game just fine. Moving on to the 4K numbers, and you notice all the differences pretty much go away. There's still a tiny difference, but we are completely and totally graphics card bound. We were actually not 100% graphics card bound at 1440p. The Intel was still faster because of just the raw performance of the CPU, but at 4K, it makes no difference. The 2080 Ti is not fast enough. However, what this does mean is that in the future, if you upgrade to a 3080 Ti or a 4080 Ti, the Intel system at 4K has room to continue going faster, whereas you've already seen as fast as the Ryzen will ever go. Next up, we have Ghost Recon Breakpoint. First time ever I've shown you Breakpoint on this channel. This is not going to be the full benchmark because it takes 3 minutes to run, and in an effort to keep this video from being 3 hours long, I'm just showing you about 1.5 minutes of it. So, this is a very pretty game and a very demanding one. This is the first game that does not run at 4K 60 frames per second on my GTX 1080 Ti, so I finally have a reason to upgrade for playing at 4K. But what you're watching at the moment is 1080p high detail. Yes, the Intel system is faster, and yes, there's still a bottleneck, but less of one compared to Far Cry New Dawn. But even on the Intel system, look at that. The graphics card is running at 93 to 94%. It is not maxed out, so there's a little bit of a CPU bottleneck there. Notice again that the i9 CPU usage is a higher percentage than the Ryzen because, again, 8 cores versus 12 cores, so the percentage is going to be lower on Ryzen. On the Ryzen CPU, for those of you curious, 4.16% is each thread. 24, basically it's 100 divided by 24. On the Intel side, it's 6.25% per thread. It's 100% divided by 16. So if something is only using a single thread, it's only going to be using about 6% of your CPU on the Intel and about 4% of the CPU on Ryzen, for those of you curious how that works. Look how gorgeous those trees are. It's absolutely beautiful. All right, enough of this. 165 frames per second on the KS, 163 on the K, 120 on the 1% low versus 110 on the K chip, 93 on the Ryzen 9 3900X. The 0.1% low is interesting. I did spend some time playing the game, not just running the benchmark, but I actually have more than a dozen hours in this game. I am actively playing it at the moment. It plays fine on the Ryzen. It's not as smooth as the Intel. I can tell you that from many hours of experience. I played it on both systems. I've been playing it on my machine at home, which is why it needs an upgrade from the 1080 Ti, because it's only running about 45 to 50 frames per second in live gameplay and combat at high detail on a 1080 Ti. I know, amazing, isn't it? The Ryzen is not as smooth, but it's really close. But if playing these sorts of games in super smooth performance with absolute fluidity is your thing, well, allow me to introduce you to the fastest gaming CPU in the world. At 1440p, it really doesn't drop by that much. It goes down to 138 and 136 on average and 108 and 100 on the 1% lows. Again, we have a little bit of microstutter going on the Ryzen 9. I will retest this on the Ryzen 7. Maybe, who knows? Maybe all those cores and threads are causing a problem. I will retest it on the Ryzen 7, which I have not done at this point. I haven't played this game on the Ryzen 7 at this point, but there's a little bit of stutter there on the Ryzen 9. The truth is all this hardware is kind of ridiculous for 1080p. If you're playing at 1440p, this is a sweet, sweet experience. How about 4K? 94 frames per second on either of the Intel chips, 88 on the Ryzen 9. Now, this is with an RTX 2080 Ti here. I can tell you, on my 1080 Ti at home, which in fairness is on an i9-9900KS 6-core 12-thread chip, I do not get anything close to this level of performance, so I am due for an upgrade. If you play at 4K, an i9-9900K with an RTX 2080 Ti, if you're playing Ghost Recon Breakpoint or anything newish, this is your jam. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, everybody's favorite dungeon crawler for the past couple of years. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I'm showing it to you anyway. We are CPU bottlenecked by a tiny bit on the Intel chip. On the left there, you can see it's kind of bouncing between 97 and 95%. That's really close to being fully utilized. Notice that we are over 50% utilization here. This game will use more than 8 cores. It actually will use up to 12. Now that's 12 threads, so a 6-core 12-thread chip will still run it fine. It won't run it as fast. It won't be quite as smooth, but it'll be fine. But the idea that games don't need more cores and threads these days is a little bit out of date. We cut out the middle section of the benchmark, which really doesn't stress it as much. I want to show you the village section, and I want you to watch the CPU utilization as we get down close to the people. We're testing CPUs here, not graphics cards. Notice that the RTX 2080 Ti is bottlenecked here. It's only running at 89 to 90% on the i9-9900K, and it's only running at 66% on the Ryzen 9 3900X. This is very much a CPU bottleneck right here. And again, I don't expect you're all running 1080p high detail on 1200R video cards. We are demonstrating the raw performance of the CPU. 50% usage on the Ryzen 9. That is 12 cores being used by this game. 53%, it just hit. More cores and threads are a good thing. The Intel chip is faster. It's an interesting discussion as to whether or not it will stay faster as games continue to grow in their core and thread count usage over the next few years. 171 frames per second on the KS, 168 on the K chip. Notice the 300 megahertz clock speed difference there doesn't really make a difference. It's the chip architecture, it's the software programming, it's the design. The Ryzen 9 3900X averaged 140. That's a fairly large drop-off, and that's simply the bottleneck of the processor, even though at times it was absolutely using all 12 cores of the chip. But, of course, it just isn't using them effectively because the clock speed's not fast enough, the architecture's not optimized, the game was probably written with Intel chips in mind. The 0.1% lows are about even, but notice the 1% low, 107 to 85, that's a fairly big drop-off. The only concern I have with Ryzen for gaming is it's really great, and then it falls off a bit. It's really great, and then it falls off a bit. The Ryzen 9 has tons of future in front of it, until you put an RTX 4080 Ti in it, and then I'm not entirely sure how well it'll do in a couple of years. Moving on to 1440p, the numbers compress a bit, but we are still being bottlenecked on the Ryzen 9 3900X. It isn't huge. It's only like 5 to 10%, but that's why there's still a difference. 134, 135, benchmark rounding errors. I mean, I run them 3 times, I average them together. 124 on the Ryzen. Now, it's much closer, but it's still a drop-off. And notice the 1% low is still the big drop-off to 80. There's still a bottleneck here, actually, across all of them, but not as much on any of them, but it's still there a little bit. Moving on to 4K, we're completely graphics card bound. Yes, the 0.1% low is a little bit higher on the KS, but again, you run enough benchmarks, they do tend to have a little bit of variance. But notice the 1% low and the average. This is absolutely 100% graphics card bound here. The CPU doesn't make any difference because we could use like twice as much graphics power at 4K. I did not test as many games this time around as I often do in these sorts of videos because you'll find that the percentage difference between the CPUs at each resolution tends to stay very similar between games. There are variations and there are exceptions, but in general at 1080p you're going to find the i9-9900K is legitimately noticeably faster at high frame rates than the Ryzen CPUs are. But at 1440p, it narrows a bit, and at 4K, the difference disappears completely because we're totally graphics card bound. It is worth noting that these same games played at 1080p on a much lower end graphics card will then compress the numbers for the same reason. We used an RTX 2080 Ti. If you have a GTX 1070, even at 1080p, you're not going to see much difference because the graphics card will make a much bigger difference. But frankly, I used a 2080 Ti because if you're spending $500 on your CPU and you're serious about gaming, yeah, it's expensive, but it's not crazy. Both of these options are meant to provide the ultimate gaming experience, or at least a super high-end experience. If you're playing Fortnite at 1080p, this is all crazy overkill, and I've done other videos to cover that. Enough about gaming. Let's take a look at some productivity benchmarks now. We will start off with everybody's favorite CPU test, Cinebench R20. AMD loves to use this test because it really runs very well on their CPUs. In fact, so much so, check out that single thread performance. Forget the multi-thread for a minute. Of course, the 12-core chip's going to win that. Notice that we have 522 on the Ryzen 9 versus 512 and 513 on the Intel chips. In Cinebench, the Ryzen 9 wins, which is why AMD demonstrates this in every single press demo they ever do. Having said that, look at the multi-threaded test. The i9 to the i9-9900KS, I mean, sure, it's a nice bump. It's a little bit of a boost. So, frankly, you can get it by turning on multi-core enhancement. But look at the Ryzen 9. Cores and threads, folks. If you do non-gaming, multi-threaded, intense workloads, there is no substitute for cores and threads. CPU-Z is another benchmark I like to run. It's a little bit different, and it's prioritized and designed a bit different than the Cinebench test is. Notice the Ryzen 9 does not win here, but it's not very far behind. 535 on the single-threaded test versus 554 and 583. Those are all really, really close numbers, folks. Yes, of course, in single-threaded real-world applications, the Cinebench test is an outlier. The reality is this is more realistic. The i9-9900KS has faster single-core performance in the vast majority of situations than the Ryzen 9. But look at that multi-threaded performance. It's not 50% faster, clock speeds, architecture, a few other things, but lordy, 8400 versus 6000, that is a result. 7-zip file compression utility has a built-in benchmark. What's interesting, and this is pretty consistent across the past couple of years, in the compressing benchmark, when actually compressing files to archives, Intel's pretty competitive with Ryzen 9. With 12 cores, 24 threads, the Ryzen 9 3900X is not that much faster than the Intel. It is faster, but it's not tremendously faster than the Intel chips. But look at the decompressing number. If you have an application that needs to decompress on a regular basis, that is a monster difference right there. When you combine the two and average them out, yeah, the Ryzen 9 crushes it. Ray tracing, and I don't mean the RTX variety. This is the POV Ray benchmark. It doesn't take very long to run, free to download, free to run. 63.39 seconds on the 9900K, 57.42 seconds on the KS. That's a very nice improvement for 300 megahertz clock speed. But lo and behold, cores and threads, 41.35 seconds to run on the Ryzen 9 3900X. What can I say? In productivity workloads, Ryzen demolishes the Intel chip due to its higher core and thread count. Blender benchmark. This is a much longer test, frankly a much more realistic workload than the very short POV Ray test. On the 9900K, it took 15 minutes and 25 seconds to run this benchmark. On the KS, it took 14 minutes and 30 seconds, a 1-minute improvement. Again, if you're doing professional workloads, spend the $25 and get it. It's a no-brainer whatsoever. However, if you're doing professional workloads, I'd like to point out that the Ryzen 9 3900X did this in 10 minutes and 40 seconds. Folks, if you're doing 3D animation, if you're doing Blender, if you're doing video encoding, transcoding, and you're not using Intel QuickSync, cores and threads. It's all about the cores and threads, and Ryzen 9 is incredible at this kind of work. Wow, talk about a role reversal. When it comes to gaming, Intel is king, no doubt about it. But if productivity is your jam, the Ryzen 9 3900X demolishes the 9900K. It isn't even close. So what do I think about this launch today? For $25 more than the regular K chip, this is a no-brainer. If you were already in the market or considering buying an i9-9900K, run and don't walk and buy the KS Special Edition. For $25, which is like 5% of the price of the CPU, and at this level, that's not a big deal, you get 5 gigahertz guaranteed clock speed. That's a deal. Then there's Ryzen. Zen 2 is very impressive. It is not as fast in gaming as the i9, but its multi-threaded performance is truly impressive, and the value for the money there for the raw compute power cannot be beaten. Whether or not you should buy one of these really depends upon what your needs are, as I discussed earlier in the video. It is also worth noting, as I mentioned earlier, that if you don't have an RTX 2080 Ti, the value of this CPU starts to fall off a bit. If you have a 2060 Super or an RX 5700 XT, frankly, a Ryzen 7 3700X, or if you want to live stream or do content work, productivity work, etc., the 3900X is a much better value. Those 1080p performance numbers will compress with a $400 video card in a way they don't with a $1,200 video card. On the other hand, if you want the best, the fastest, the smoothest, the most impressive gaming experience money can buy, there is only one choice for you, the i9-9900KS. If you have or plan to buy an RTX 2080 Ti or next year's RTX 3080 Ti, which will split those performance numbers a bit more since the Intel has more headroom, this really is the CPU for you. One more thing, overclocking. You didn't think I was going to close out an Intel K-chip video without talking about overclocking, did you? First of all, the i9-9900K, at least my sample, does run at 5 gigahertz at 1.35 volts with the Noctua cooler just fine. However, neither the KS chip nor the 3900X have any effective overclocking headroom in them. Effectively, both Intel and AMD have pushed their CPUs to the absolute limit. They'll both run 100 or 200 megahertz faster with some extra voltage applied, but it is a minor difference. You are not going to get enough extra speed out of either company's CPUs to make it worth the trouble. If you buy a KS or if you buy a 3900X, run them at stock, enjoy amazing performance. Frankly, they're both awesome CPUs. Thank you all so much for watching this i9-9900KS launch review. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you love it. Remember to subscribe to the channel with the big huge red button directly below. Hit the bell notification icon next to that to be notified when new videos come out. Links in the video description below to all these products on Amazon and Newegg. Those are affiliate links. They support the channel. Please use those when shopping. If you like our content, it'll help us bring more of it to you. The comment section below is where you should tell me what you think. Did you like this video? What did you like? What do you want to see more of in future reviews? I don't respond to all the comments down there, but I do read them. You can also support the channel directly on Patreon, Floatplane, directly here on YouTube using the join button down below, and on Twitch. My Twitch and my wife's Twitch are both linked down in the description below. Throw us a sub over there if you'd like to see some more from the channel. Twitter and Discord links are also in the video description below. Stop by and say hello. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see all of you next time.